and the Tea Party movement are fueled by a sense of frustration by a system that no longer seems to work for anyone anymore. Do you see any differences between the two movements?
Yeah, of course.
If you could use your microphone.
I always think my voice will carry farther than it does. Yeah, of course there is. You know, it's a question of where the problem really lies. The people that are in the Tea Party movement, to a large extent, I think, feel that government is the problem. The people in the Occupy believe that, you know, government has skewed the system so that the wealthy are now getting a much better deal than they've ever had before. You know, it hasn't been more than 12 years since the United States of America, I think you all remember this, we had a balanced budget. We had a balanced budget. How did that happen? It happened with a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. And the truth of the matter is that we could go back to having balanced budgets again if people at the high end were paying what they had paid once before. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that just cutting taxes and cutting taxes and cutting taxes is the end solution to the problem. George W. Bush cut taxes 3 times, and, you know, at the end of his administration, we were shedding 600,000 jobs a month. And let me give you that word, shed. We were losing $600,000 jobs a month. So I don't think that's the direction we need to go. I think both organizations have certain very good points, and I think that we need to listen to both.
Okay, thank you. That was your second one, right? Okay, all right. And I'm going to close with one question I'd like for both of you to respond to, and Senator Eklund, you will get to go first on this. Nancy Pelosi said that we had to pass Obamacare to find out what was in it. I think everybody remembers that. A congressman from Michigan stated that the bill was too complex for him or his staff to even try to read it. What is your position on voting on legislation that you haven't read?
Well, look, you're a legislator. When one is a legislator, one's responsibility is to read and understand the legislation that that legislator is called upon to vote for or against. And one who finds themselves unable to do that in the normal course of their duties as a state legislator had better figure out a way to do it. And I will tell you, and I will say this quite frankly, Chuck, sometimes it's not easy. Some of these bills are very complex. They sometimes originate out of parts of society that any given legislator may have absolutely no familiarity with. And so there's a degree of education and reading and understanding and seeking outside help to understand these things that has to be undertaken. It's very much like any professional endeavor. When it's done properly, it is, believe me, hard work. But the notion that someone should be called upon to vote on a measure and then to cast that vote without having read it and without having as best a human understanding of that measure that that individual can have, I think is a breach of the public's faith, and it should not occur.
I would tend to agree with almost all of what Senator Eklund has said, but I want to add in something that you may not know about. There's a thing called the Legislative Service Commission in Columbus, Ohio, which is an organization that serves the legislature. And what it basically does is it creates a committee report. And the committee system is very important to understand in that while every legislator may not know everything that there is to know about the hunting laws of this state, or about some obsequious little section of the law that has to do with some subject, the Legislative Service Commission, which has the highest standards, analyzes that for you and puts it in a relatively succinct description. If you have a small bill that's of a readable size, of course you should read that. But when you're talking about a bill that's 2,000 pages long, as some legislation is, it's virtually impossible to do that, especially when you're doing it overnight. And then there are 500 amendments 2 days later, it becomes an impossibility. The Legislative Service Commission in Columbus does a very, very good job. And one of the things I'm going to tell you about, the little secret, because I'm going to tell you about this because it's important. Anytime you look up a piece of legislation, all of you can actually access the Legislative Service Commission report. So if you're reading this thing over and you say to yourself, you know, I'm a layman, I don't quite understand this. Go to the Legislative Service Commission and type in the same bill. And what could be 65 or 70 pages long will in fact be a page and a half, and you can understand it. And you can, to the greatest extent possible, you can trust what is said there. Because over the years, people have complained about the fact that, you know, the Legislative Service Commission tilted one way or the other, but that's not true. That's one of the inviolable things that the legislature does. They make sure that that Legislative Service Commission says exactly what the accuracy is of the legislation.
Hi, I'm Greg Satsay. I'm one of the founders of the LA County Tea Party. This is a question that was submitted by Senator Eklund for Mr. Mueller. Do you think that businesses operating in Ohio are overregulated, underregulated, overtaxed, or undertaxed? And what do you think would be the ideal regulatory environment for our state, for businesses?
Obviously, there are industries which there is under-regulation, and there are some that need more regulation, and there are others that could need some regulatory relief. And you have to look at those things. I think that Mr. Eklund had pointed out that there's a screening process now where every 5 years they go through the rules and regulations to see which ones they can remove and can do away with, and I think that's a very good approach. But I'm also convinced that there are some areas where probably regulation needs to be even more. God only knows, I wish that we had had more regulations on the mortgage industry that took this country down 5 years ago. I mean, there's the perfect example, in my opinion, of where we let some things slide and we should have done that. And it ended up with catastrophic results.
I'd like to just get a little follow-up question on that, and then I'd like to ask Senator Eklund to respond to the same question, since we didn't get any questions from you, Mr. Mueller. Do you think that the genesis of the problem in the financial sector was the injection of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into the mortgage industry in the 30s and on, which caused the government to be insuring mortgages in such a way that there was no market break on taking mortgages that were clearly bad because the people didn't have an income to qualify. And what I mean is this: if I'm handing out checks and I start handing, and I say, Chuck is going to guarantee every check I hand out, no one cares whether my account is overdrawn or not, because it doesn't matter, because you're going to get paid. Now, in this case, Chuck would be the government, and I would be, you know, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac insuring mortgages. And if they're handing these things out, do you think that was part of the reason why a large number of toxic mortgages were approved?
Well, I think that might